Lori, may we please have roll call?
Crystal,
Here.
John,
Here.
Emma will be a little late. Todd Kirking
Here.
and Todd Spaeth will not be here tonight.
Okay, and we do have a quorum, so we'll just move right ahead. Item number 2 is the first period for public comment. If we have anyone online who would like to address the commission or the committee at this time, please do so. Item number 3 is a possible closed session. Per Wisconsin statute 1985 1-C, considering employment, promotion, compensation, or performance evaluation data of any public employee over which the governing body has jurisdiction or exercises responsibility. This is for consideration of offer of employment for a dispatcher position. So we would need a motion to go into closed session.
So moved. Todd will second it.
Thank you. A motion and a second. May we have roll call, Lori?
John,
Aye.
Todd,
Aye.
and Crystal.
Aye. Okay, we are in closed session, but we should use our mics. No, or not.
The judge had submitted a lot of things to Trip and then also sent letters out. So you're gonna see some things in there, like say to the village of the Stoddard. We haven't been with the village of Stoddard for several years, but this is collecting on some old debts. So they'll be surprised actually when they get a payment coming in as well. So that is why there is so many of them this time. So that is for that. Also on the page 3, paying the utility, because also right along with that, this is the time of year where we're collecting a lot of money back through Trip because we're taking their tax refunds. So the utilities had several of them out there and they run through our account as well. So when it comes through our bank statement, we're just paying back the utility for their portion of it. So that's what those Trip payments are for. From their tax refund? Yes. We're paying, Dominion Voting Systems is a new vendor for us because with that second voting machine, we actually are paying directly to Dominion. The other machine was through the county, and so they had an actual, contract with Dominion. So we were paying the county and the county was paying Dominion. With our second one, because of the fact that we're the only ones that have that, when they set up our contract, we were going to be paying Dominion directly. And so that's a yearly thing. This is the first time after we got that. So that's for the second machine, for the software piece. Page 4, you're going to see a large payment to the chamber for the room tax of $40,630.88. The reason that is so large is because the Vernon Inn hadn't paid us their room tax since July of last year. So we finally caught payment from July all the way up through March of this year. So $20,000 of that is actually coming from the Vernon Inn. So that's why that's such a larger amount. Heritage Inn it was like a month later. So that's why that one's a little bit in there as well. So most of those are coming through like Expedia and those other room tax agencies. So I can't tell again if they're all city of Viroqua, but we're just collecting the cash and moving it on. So. I think the rest was just mainly regular items unless you have questions.
I just have one. There's a CNC wood chips thing on there for Park and Rec for 1902-15. And I was at the meeting in the audience the other night and I thought they said that was donated. So I didn't know if I misheard or.
Where's that in the bills?
It's kind of towards the bottom.
We didn't have a donation for wood chips. The donation was for the sod at the
Okay,
baseball and softball fields.
okay. Thank you for
Yep.
clarifying.
Yep.
All right, that's good. All right, no other questions? Okay, then we would look for a motion.
This is Todd, I'll make a motion to accept the bills. Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second to accept the payment on the bills. May we have a roll call, please, Lori?
Crystal,
Aye.
John,
Aye.
and Todd.
Todd, aye.
Okay. Then we move to item number 6, which is our quarterly financial review. Who gets the fun of doing that?
Oh, good. Well, we all get to have fun by talking about the bills, right? And our finances. So, we'll try to do these every quarter. And then of course, the end of year financials would happen when the audit is done. That's kind of the cadence we've been in. So this is going to be for January through March of this year. You know, for those of you who have been on finance personnel, you've probably seen this before. Todd, I don't know if you've gone through this just yet, but this is generally what we go through. We just do a quick reminder of what our expense and budget looks like. And again, this is just going to be for the general fund revenue. And it won't touch on the utilities. Yeah. And I try to make, I try to make a lot of pictures. And so we can, graphs and charts and things like that. So just a couple notes. One is just the way to read variances, that if it's a variance and revenue exceeds what was budgeted, is going to show up as a positive variance. But if it's an expense that exceeds what the budget is, it's going to show up as a negative variance, even though it's more, and that's because it has a negative impact on the net. So it can get a little confusing, but once you get used to it, it all makes sense. And then just to note that, none of what we approved today is going to be reflected in here. None of what happened in April is going to be reflected here. So this is only from March, and this is based on the report that was pulled in April. So throughout the year, there's going to be journal entries made, and money is going to be moved around if it gets in the wrong account. This is just a reminder of why we're doing it, just to make sure that we have good oversight and fiscal control, and that monthly reviews help us identify performance, correct errors, make adjustments, so on and so forth. And that's, all three of those are going to become apparent today. So just as a reminder, here's what our expense budget looks like for the year and kind of how it's broken out. This is kind of important because when we're looking at these things, there are certainly more categories that are really keen to keep an eye on than others. Wages, benefits, contract for services are most important ones to keep an eye on because they represent the largest amount of money. Meanwhile, while miscellaneous insurance is important, collectively, it's a much smaller part of the budget. Here's what it looks out if those same numbers are broken out by department. So not by category, but by department. And you can see that typically public works and police are the largest, and then on from there. So this is sort of what a table you'll see throughout. The first column is what's year to date through March, end of March of 2024. The second column is what's budgeted for the entire year, not what's budgeted just through March, what's for the entire year. And then the next one shows how much of that budget has been expended through March of 2024. So you'll see there, if we drop down the contract for services, as an example, we spent $246,000 approximately of the $829,000 budget. Therefore, 29% of the budget has been expended. And that's just a helpful benchmark to see, what our pace and our trend is for spending money. And then that last column shows the exact same percentage, but it's last year's. It's last year's year to date through March versus last year's budget. So historically it helps you because one way of thinking about this is that how many months of the year have been expended? Let's say we're through June. That's 50% of the year, so we would expect 50% of the expenses. But not every expense category follows an equal expenditure month after month. There are some things like park and rec where wages are really ramp up in the summer because of seasonal, right? And so looking historically at previous years helps you sort of compare. It's like, oh, even though we're really spending money quickly, this is exactly how it went last year, right? And this is an exercise that department heads will do to identify any variances kind of are a red flag. They're like, oh, that's weird. For instance, why is, last year we spent 13%. Why are we already at 36, right? And maybe cause them to go and do further investigation. A couple notes just as we look at this that in, I believe it was February, Lori, we received $4 million in ARPA money for the North Point project, which was kind of a partial disbursement of the grant we received for that project. And in turn, we gave out $950,000 as part of the phase 1 of their development agreement, if you remember doing that. I take those numbers out of these because they really skew them, right? All of a sudden, you're going to see something like capital projects or other really jump up, and it just makes the graphs and everything really throws them off. So you'll see that often throughout this thing. Here's what it looks like if we exclude capital expenses. They can often skew things as well, especially when we're in the middle of big capital projects. But this is where you're at, and kind of the benchmark you can see we're fairly in line with where we were last year in terms of total expenses year to date. And then you can kind of look up variations, and we'll kind of go through this a little bit more. Here's wages, and this is by department. The first bar in each department is from 2022. The blue one is from 2023, and the 4. So you can kind of see how each department's wages have been expended through March of each year. And so again, another way to look at it to identify, is there anything of concern? And down below, I just have a few notes that sort of explain why, if there's any big changes. So in Parks and Rec here is like, oh, why was it so high in 2023, but around the same in both 22 and 24? The answer is because Boone retired last year. And when a director or a longstanding employee retires, they have a payout, and that payout inflates the wages. Similar to administrative, that's what happened is when our deputy clerk retired. For the most part, wages, I don't see any concerns. Everything is about where you would expect it to be. The only thing of note was that the fire chief did note that there were some larger fires earlier this year that expended a lot of firefighter time. But as you can see, it's fairly in line with where we were at the year before. Okay. Benefits. As you can see, the dark green bar is much higher in some departments than others. One thing to note is that unlike previous years, all departments' health insurance premiums are paid 1 month ahead of time. So, for instance, if you look at administrative, we've expended 25% of the year because we've gone 3 months by this point in March, but yet by March, we've already paid for April as well. So you've paid 4 months of insurance in 3 months, if that makes sense. So that's one thing to keep in mind, is that there is a change because everybody's just paying a month ahead. The other thing to note is particularly in public works in the library, there was an increase in enrollment in our health insurance, which has a big impact on expenses. In public works in particular, the enrollment in that department doubled from where it was the year before. And as you'll see there in this last line, this is a major area of concern because we're on trend in that department to be $52,000 over budget by the end of the year. And that's a large amount. The way I do budgets for everybody for health insurance is I look at what current enrollment is. I move that forward and say, what are the new rates going to be? We take into account any potential variances in how HRA works. So this year we kind of knew HRA would work differently. And so Lori and I increased the amount of the HRA that would be coming out of the different department heads. And typically in years past, it's worked really well. It just so happened in this year, it's a little bit of outlier. We had a very large number of add-ons to our health insurance plan. And so what that likely means is, and I've already talked about this with Sarah, and I'll touch base with Trina as well. What that means is we're going to have to come up with a plan about how we're going to absorb this, right? $52,000 is just a lot of money, and it's not good practice to necessarily let that ride against our cash balance. So part of what we'll probably do is come up with a plan, bring it to council, and say, hey, this is how we're going to deal with it. Okay. Any questions on that? Contract for services. This one can be a little goofy. Some of it just depends on timing. So you can see here in administrative, last year was way up because we had the tourism payout, that the same one we just talked about tonight. Last year it happened in March. So it's just a matter of timing. Whereas this time when we sort of trued up with the Tourism Commission, this one happened in May. That last year it happened in March. So that's kind of why you see some of those variances. Fire department, this is building permits. We've had a number of large projects happen in the community. Viroqua schools and North Point are, collectively constitute at least half. Well, I shouldn't say that. A huge chunk of what we would normally see in a year. And, with the Aldi and things like that, we're just going to continue to see a fairly large building permit expense because that's what we pay to GEC for their inspection services. But what's important to note is that on the flip side, on the revenue side, we're going to see significantly the same and greater revenue to offset that. Okay. Library, you can see like 1 year, it was the exact same last year, and this is all just timing of when invoices get paid for certain things. Park and Rec, this is the first year that they've actually had a GL, that's a general ledger line that's categorized as contract for services, so that's why you don't see anything here. And then Public Works, I just note here that recycling bills are now paid a month after. So this only constitutes January and February's waste and recycling bills. So questions on that? So those are sort of the big three. After that, everything gets a little bit smaller. Here's fuel and utilities. So this is gas, electric, gasoline for vehicles, things like that. Between administrative and public works, there was a bill that was supposed to go here that went in here instead for street lights. Everybody else has, as best as I can imagine, is that we had a fairly mild winter, January, February, that kept heating costs down. Our gasoline across the board use seems to be a little lower in terms of price. So everybody's seen, I'm not quite sure what's going on with police there. I haven't had a chance to talk to Rick about what exactly is going on there, but for the most part, utilities, fuel and utilities are feeling fairly good to start the year, despite what administrative looks like.
Didn't we originally the fuel was included in something else? Isn't this one of the first times it's separated out?
Slowly but surely, we've been
Yeah.
moving it into its own category
Yeah.
so you can look at it separately. The airport there is sort of case in point. You can see that in the past, their actual utilities, so their XL, MG&E was just lumped in with their other category. So yeah, we're trying to do
Okay.
better about calling that out specifically.
Cool.
And did you have something? Sorry, I know your microphone seems to just be cutting in and out. Okay. Maintenance and equipment. Again, a little bit of this is just timing of purchases. Parks and Rec, it seems like they just purchased some of their equipment earlier. Police's way that was compared to last year, because one of their GLs was just really far over budget last year, and this year it's kind of come back down to where to be in line with its budget. And then for Sarah's budget there, she kind of noted that this year she purchased salt in April, which was one of the biggest supply lines she has come out this early. So, and let me know if I'm going too slow or too fast. And then this is a really small one. This is just kind of a catch-all graph. So this is other categories, which we've really whittled down to be a small percentage of our budget, right? Beforehand, it was like 10% or more of our budget line, our money was in other categories. And since then, we've tried to place those expenses in more descriptive categories. Insurance, miscellaneous insurance, this just really goes into like workers' comp, property liability, and general liability. And that's all tucked into the administrative category. For the most part, the airport does carry their own liability insurance now. But, this is, some of these later categories get pretty, I guess I'll call them volatile in terms of when and how money comes out, because it's so much at the discretion of the director to decide, hey, is now the right time to make a purchase. Maybe they wait 2 months, where the year before they were 2 months earlier. It just all depends, but really not too many concerns here. Any questions? Those are sort of your categories broken on. Then this is just on hold by the department about where the department's total expenses are trending. And so a few comments here. Again, administrative, last year we had a retirement of a staff person. We had some additional legal fees that were unexpected. After that, everything seems to be within margins of where you would expect it to be, with some variations. Everybody's sort of hovering around that 25% mark. Anybody have any questions on expenses? Okay. Here's revenue. I should make this graph bigger going forward, but as you'll see, taxes and assessments are our biggest categories, and then intergovernmental revenues, shared revenues from the state, things like that, and then to a much smaller degree, everything else. When we look at overall, all the different categories, you can sort of see again, compared to last year, we're pretty close to being on trend. There are some variations. Similar to expenses, that $4 million in ARPA funds that we removed, I took that out of these calculations because otherwise it would make, oh gosh, what was it, Lori? Miscellaneous revenues just fly through the chart and would skew all the data really, really badly. Here's where our taxes and assessments are at. There's really nothing of note here. I don't know if Lori has anything to comment on, but taxes, went through just as expected. Room tax Last year, you always kind of see this where some of the room tax gets backed up into the previous year, which is why you'll see a negative count, which is a little goofy, but I don't know if there's anything super worthwhile to point on here, Lori.
I just have to, for audit or whatever, I have to do entries to put it in the previous year and then it gets reversed in the new year. So that's why it's looking at that negative amount or whatever, and it kind of evens out towards the end of the year, so.
Here's our intergovernmental. These ones are equal or somewhat equally important, but there's a lot more of them. I know that's probably a little hard to see. The big thing to note is when you look at pattern from last year, it's looking good. Most areas are about where you expect. I did make some comments here, for instance, in state grant mass transit assist, that's payment we get from the state for their for our taxi service. I think Lori's comments were, it's just a month earlier than it was last year. So beforehand, we wouldn't have gotten anything. This year, we got it in March instead of April, right? So again, a lot of this can be timing. And that's why Lori and I and the rest of the department heads do these exercises, because we ask ourselves like, hey, is there something wrong or is it just a little off in terms of when we receive it, right? Special payments to the state, this looks like a huge jump, but it's a matter of, additional $1,000. And so we keep an eye on a lot of these things. So we're trending ahead. This payment in lieu of taxes, the reason it looks like, oh, we got to pay a bunch more is actually because in 2023 was off. So you can see here that in 2023, a payment for 2023 was made in 2022, and that's why it made March look really far off last year. So I'm not going to go through every one, but this is just, generally what to keep an eye on. Municipal court budget contributions last year, we pretty much got all our money from the other townships or from the, So for that, it's just, last year they paid us in March, and this year we haven't gotten any of our payments from municipal court, the other communities, so. Fines and forfeitures, again, trending a little bit ahead of time. You'll see a few places where it's lower. Parking violations, we didn't have as many winter snow events this beginning of this year, so we didn't give out as much tickets where 2023 was really bad, right? And charges for public service. This is something Lori and I will keep an eye on. Airport fuel income is a matter of when Lori reconciles. If she doesn't get it in before I pull numbers, it's not going to show it. The rent for the airport income looks really bad because in previous years, we didn't allocate the ag land rent to them, and that gets paid at the end of the year. Now that it's in their budget, it represents a big part, but it doesn't get paid. That big part doesn't get paid till the end of the year. So that's why their percentages drop drastically, is because the bulk of it is now coming in at the end of the year versus the much smaller amount in the beginning. All the revenue, the one thing I'll point out here is that our general fund revenue interest is looking really good. And that's because we're holding on to a lot of that ARPA fund money, and it's just generating interest on our behalf. So that's always nice. So here's where our cash position looks like. This is just over 4 years. The gold is where we're at right now. And you feel really good about it. It's like, oh, we have so much cash on hand. It's the ARPA money, right? So what I did is I probably should have gone in and just pulled that out as well. But instead, I just said down here, the balance is about 3.4 million as of April. So if you look in April, it's probably, you're right around here. So still strong, but not as strong as that, right? It would be nice if we had that much cash on hand. Here's what monthly revenues over expenses look like. The black line represents the budget, which is where, if all goes exactly as planned, where both revenue and expenses should end. And as you can see, this is pretty consistent. We can't really see this here, but if you put this alongside past years in the trends, this is exactly how it goes. We get a jump in revenue here, but then Lori sort of reconciles with the county on the tax settlement. And that's why it looks really good in January, but then drops in February because it's not, half of it isn't our money, right? And then you kind of see you'll start to see each sort of category creep up. There'll be bursts of jumps in revenue that a lot of our intergovernmental sources will like show up in August, November, things like that. And here's just what all those things, I know this is a lot of text, but essentially what you need to look at here is here's our expenses through March. Here's our revenues through March, our expenses through March, and sort of what our percentages are looking like. You can see for the most part, everything is shaking out to be on track. In terms of takeaways, I would say like revenue patterns are following what we would expect them to do. Building permits are the only things that are really outliers right now, and that's because we've had the big projects happening, right? And that will continue to be something that you'll see. And I have that same exact thing here in expenses, is that there's going to be a lot more building inspector fees this year than what we budgeted for, just because we have a lot of big projects underway. And expenses, wages generally on target. Benefits are the one area in this whole quarterly report that I would outline in black and red lights, or whatever you want to say, simply because it's diverting greatly from budget, and there's not much we can do about it other than adjust in other areas. And so we'll be circling back again to the council and the finance committee with regards to how we're going to approach that. Everything else is feeling pretty good. And again, a lot of the expenses that are like the other expenses, the equipment, supplies, materials, those are all at the discretion of department heads, but just depend on trends and when they show up. So with that, Emma have impeccable timing because she just got to escape my financial review. So any, no, it's okay. Any questions or thoughts on the finances, clarification, anything you want me to go back?
I just have one question. And do we have an idea why there was an increase in the enrollment?
Yeah, preliminary conversations seem to suggest that we switched providers, or I should say carriers, and this carrier is maybe a little bit more bona fide than the last one. The rates also went down 5%, although we've had rates drop 20% before, and we haven't seen the shift in enrollment like we did this year. Lori?
Most of it is because the employer had our policy was better than the employer on their spouse's policy.
Thank you.
Okay, do you want to share?
Yeah.
Well,
As long as you don't say names.
and keep it in the aggregate. Whatever you'd like to do.
Thanks, Sarah.
So, we can certainly dive more into it, but what appeared to be a better deal at first actually was not, is what I've been hearing. So people are regretting switching. So it may not, whereas that might have instigated the switch, it certainly, I don't want us to come off with the impression that we are a better deal, because it sounds like we're actually, in fact, not.
All right. Well, thank you very much. It was a lot of work to put that together, but I do appreciate it. Will that be shared with council? at any point?
We typically, and that's a good question, Crystal. We typically have not done the same presentation at council, so we've reserved the financial reviews,
Mhm.
the quarterly ones for this committee, but the audit ones go to council. I
Okay.
was gonna say, I would hope so. But I will pass them along to them,
Yeah.
just a spreadsheet so
Great.
they can have the notes and things like that. And I will say the department heads are continuing to do a better and better job, kind of keeping an eye on their accounts and their GLs, and we're spotting issues, and I'm feeling good that we're having a lot more oversight
Yeah.
of our
I know it feels a lot better just from the presentation too, of what we've had in the
Yep.
past. So thank you to everybody, department heads included, for taking care of that. Okay, item number 7 is a second period for public comment. Do we have anyone who would like to address the count or committee at this time? Okay, then we would look for a motion to adjourn, please.
This is Todd, I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Second.
Okay, we've got a motion and a second for adjournment. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
All right.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Okay, motion passes. We are adjourned. Thank you, everybody.